Welcome, Restoration, to another episode. An episode, I guess we can call them episodes here on the internet, can't we? Because what else are you going to call them? I don't know. But welcome to another week of Bible stories. So glad you're here with us. My name is Brian, and I'm excited to be here and speaking today. Want to give you a quick announcement, real quick, that on Sunday evening at 6 o'clock p.m. we're going to be having our very first in-person kind of a church service. You're going to find out about who we are, where we're going, what we're doing, all of those things. And we're going to do it right from my front porch. So we're going to be outside of the basement, which is awesome. We're going to be outside of the basement. We're going to be on the front porch. There's plenty of area for seating. And so if you're worried about social distancing or any of those types of things, I just want to assure you that unless we get like 200 people, we're going to be just fine. So just wanted to encourage you to make it out to that. Invite a friend if you know someone who might be interested in what we're doing here at Restoration. I also got the okay from Right Brain to be able to continue to meet there once everything gets up and running. Once we announce that date for when we're going to be meeting together, which you will find out this Sunday night if you show up. You're going to find out when that date is. So we're excited to be partnering with them with Right Brain Brewery. They're kind enough to allow us to use their space, and we're pumped about it. So we've got a big week ahead of us, and we encourage you to come on out. Bring a koozie with something in it if you want to sit and drink and relax. Have something you enjoy, and bring a lawn chair because we don't have very many. We've got like 5, and so you'll be sitting in the grass or standing the whole time if you don't bring a chair. If you come to our house, you're going to realize something really quick, probably, that in our home, and I don't know if this is true in yours as well, but Hamilton fever has taken over the Williams household. It is unbelievable. Our kids listen to it nonstop. Now, you can think I'm a bad parent for letting my kids listen to Hamilton. I don't care. You can judge me all you want. But they listen to that soundtrack non-stop. They've watched it a few times, and they anytime we go anywhere, it's Hamilton. Now I enjoy it. I'm gonna fess up and say that I actually really really enjoy the music, and sometimes I'm the one that picks it. Okay, but it's reached its fever pitch. They're singing every single song as much as they possibly can. It's very loud and it's insane. But as we're watching that musical and as we've kind of dove into all things Hamilton, one thing that really struck me was the courage and the faith that it took for him to take that chance to leave the Caribbean, his home, all that kind of stuff, and come to America and be one of the founding fathers is a pretty incredible story. And you think back about the history of American history and how the Revolutionary War and all of these things, like everything that's happened has been unbelievable, both good and bad, and the way that this country has started and the chances that were taken were incredible, and the faith risks that were done were pretty incredible to look back on and see. And so you got to at least give it that you see history and you see, wow, what these people overcame, what they had to accomplish, what they were setting a precedent with everything. And so it was really cool. Everyone lives by faith in something, right? Everyone lives in faith, lives by faith in something, whether it's the country or your job or hopefully your faith in God is the thing that you put all of your faith on and the faith that you live by. But we put it in relationships. We can put it on founding fathers, and we can put it on founding fathers of our faith even, right? And tonight, today, whatever time you're looking at this, reading this, watching this, I don't know. I'm reading the Bible. One of the things we're going to be talking about today, we're talking about the story of Abraham. We could put our faith in Abraham, and it would be ill-advised to do so. See, I entitled this message "Dishonest Abe" because, honest Abe, dishonest Abe, it's kind of funny. Abraham did a lot that was wrong. But still, he was commended for his faith. Abraham did a ton of stuff wrong. I mean, he lied twice about his wife actually being a sister to a king because he didn't want to get murdered. Right? He did all that kind of stuff. He decided that his wife and he decided that there was no way that God was going to fulfill their promise to him through Sarah, so they might as well have Abraham go have sex with his one of his servants, Hagar. And so he goes and does that, and they have Ishmael. And that wasn't the plan that God had for them either. And so we see this life that Abraham had. He cheated on his wife with her consent. He told other people that he was her brother and not her husband to save his own skin. He was a fearful person. So he was a dishonest person, and yet he's included in faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, the hall of faith. He's all over the place in the Old Testament. You can see him in Genesis chapter 12 all the way through 25, and we're not going to spend any time there. How are we going to study Abraham? I don't know. We'll figure it out. He's also got a chapter in Romans 4 where the Apostle Paul talks about the faith of Abraham. He was a man of great faith, but he still did a lot wrong. And I think in our culture, in our country, we see people who do a lot of good things right, but we focus in on the few things that they do wrong, don't we? On the very few things, or maybe a lot of things, that they do wrong. When we look back at the life of Hamilton, people now are wanting to cancel, quote unquote, cancel Hamilton because of some things that he was involved with. Was he a slave trader or was he not? I don't know. I didn't really look that far into it. I know that he had an affair. He had a couple of affairs. He wasn't that great of a person, but we look at what he did and what he stood for and the things that he was able to accomplish, and you can't necessarily separate them out, but you have to understand that he's a human being. I'm a human being, and you're a human being. And one of the founding things for Restoration Church is that we stand on transparency with one another, with Christ and with one another. And so I can tell you the faults that I have. I can tell you all of the things that I've done wrong. We can be transparent with one another and know that we're going to make mistakes and know that we're going to fall short every single step of the way. But we have a God who redeems us, and it's by his love and his word that we live by, and we live by the faith that he offers us. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Abraham and faith. And we're going to be looking in Hebrews chapter 11. Now, we've referenced it quite a few times. We've referenced this book, and even last week, I think I alluded to it, and I didn't ever give the context to it. I said that Samson was named in the Hall of Faith, and then I didn't give you any sort of context on what that meant. Is like, what is that in like Cincinnati or something? No, it's in Hebrews chapter 11. We call that the Hall of Faith, and we're going to be spending our time in that. But one thing I've noticed through all of these people with faith, whether it's Alexander Hamilton having faith in the ideals of the country with the founding fathers, or maybe it's with your marriage, or maybe faith in your marriage, or faith in a person, or faith in God. One thing that faith does is faith breeds perseverance. Faith breeds perseverance. If we have the faith to hold on, if we have the faith to hold on through the struggle, through the things that are really terrible in our lives, it breeds perseverance. We are stronger on the other side. Faith breeds perseverance. And we look at Abraham, we look at his life, and we're going to get into some of the things that he did, the great things that he did. There's several stories that we can look at, but by faith, Abraham did all of these things, and he persevered throughout his entire life. I think he lived to be about 175 years old. Faith breeds perseverance. Even through all of the things that Abraham did wrong, of all the things that he messed up, and he did his fair share. He was 175 years old. So Abraham had his fair share of things done wrong. But through all of those things, perseverance was built because faith breeds perseverance. And Abraham was a guy who lived by faith. So when we look at Hebrews chapter 11, we see that all of these verses, that whenever they introduce a new character, it always says that by faith, it was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God. Clayton shared on that one. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. It was by faith that Noah built a large boat. See, all of these things are by faith. That's why we call it the Hall of Faith. Now, here's the dangerous thing about faith, okay? Not the dangerous thing, but when we start talking about faith, we think about all these grand gestures of faith that people have taken, these huge steps, like, oh my goodness, that person, they moved to the remote jungle, and they sold everything that they had, and they just wanted to preach to people in the jungle. I could never live up to that faith. I could never live up to the faith of that person or that person. I only have a little bit of faith to do what I'm able to do. I wish I had more faith. I wish I could do the things that person did. And we need to be careful of that, because every measure of faith, whether it's just talking to a neighbor about who Jesus is, or showing up at work even though you don't want to, because it's where God has called you, by faith, those are all steps of faith. And we can look at Romans 12 in verse 3. This is just a guiding verse for us as we talk about this hall of faith and the faith of Abraham, and we can get almost jealous of the faith of Abraham. When we do this, we want to look at Romans 12:3. It says, "Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us." So we measure ourselves by the faith God has given us. We do not have faith on our own. Faith is not something that we can manifest. Faith is something that is given by God. And in other translations of that verse, it says, by the measure of faith in which they were given. So it goes to reason that God distributes varying levels of faith to different people. And so we're supposed to think to ourselves, we're supposed to process who we are in the measure of faith that God has given to us. And are we using our gifts? Are we using our talent to the measure of God and His faith in us that He's given to us? Are we stepping out in the faith that God has given to us? Or are we squandering opportunities, much like Samson did last night? He was given, last week, he was given very much, but he did very, very little with it. What's that verse again? Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us. And so as we keep going in this study today on Abraham, I just want to keep that in mind, that all of these things that we're going to be talking about, God has given each of us a measure of faith. And we don't need to compare it to what that person is doing, or what that person is doing, or what I'm doing, or what you're doing. But we need to think, again, a different translation, with sober judgment, that we ought not think too highly of ourselves. There's this humbling of like, am I doing what God's called me to do? Not about what God's called that person to do or that person to do, but what has God called me to do? So with that disclaimer, knowing that this is by faith, and we don't always have to look at the grandiose gestures of faith, but what are the simple things of faith that we can do? And I think we're going to learn a lot from old Father Abraham, who had, as you know, many sons. All right, we're going to pick it up in Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verse 8. And I did not proofread any of this, so I hope it's right. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner, living in tents, and so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city designed and built by God. Did you catch that very first verse in verse 8? Did you catch that? He went without knowing where he was going. God called him somewhere, and by faith he went, not even knowing where he was going. I know in my journey that I'm on right now with all of this stuff, with restoration, I've always wanted to know what's the next step before I take that step. And some of these times, God has shown it to me. Some of these times, God has not shown it to me, but just simply told me to keep going, to keep taking risks. And that's our first point, that by faith, we risk. We look at the life of Abraham. This was a guy who had settled. He was fine. Everything was going good. And God told him to leave, so he packed up his family. Everything that he had. His family was his wife, and he had his servants, and he had animals, and he had the farm, all of that kind of stuff. It's my dog. He's going to get on the couch. He got on the couch. By faith, Abraham went and he risked. And so for us, for you, for me, by faith, we risk. And what's funny is risking can look different to different people. Remember, the measure of faith that God has given you. Measure it by the faith that God has gifted you. Gifted you. I remember when we first moved to northern Michigan, we had people who were who were just awed by our bravery to move to the Traverse City area to work at a church. I didn't see this as a risk, okay? Because we were moving to a premier vacation destination. We were moving to a very, very nice destination with a very, very nice church that I had a great job at, that I was getting paid to do. It's not like I didn't know where I was going to be getting paid from. It's not like I didn't have a job going up here. I moved up here for a job, and it was in ministry. But because it was in ministry, people assumed that I was taking this huge faith step. And to some people, that may have looked like a huge faith step. But to me, it was just, this is a job that I have to go do. This is what God is telling us to go do. And it's interesting when we are living by faith that that's all that it really is. Now, sometimes it's more involved than that. But I just found it funny that people thought I was risking everything. I wasn't leaving my family behind. Everyone was going with me. I was taking the dogs. In fact, the dog went up before us. You can ask me about that later. He didn't travel on his own. Somebody went with him. But people thought we were insane for doing that. See, in me, I see a risk in stuff like what Abraham did. Did you know that Abraham was the first one to do the old snippy snip, the circumcision, right? God made that covenant with Abraham when Abraham was a grown man. Now, you want to talk about taking a risk by faith? Asking your bros to take that little snippy snip with you. That's a faith step. That's a risk. I mean, Traverse City is nice. I'm not sure I would take that risk. Yeah. I don't think I would. Risk is asking your bros to get circumcised. So we see Abraham, and he takes this huge risk, not just in that, but also in moving and going where God wasn't going to say where he was going. So by faith, we risk. We're going to keep going. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child. Though she was barren and was too old, she believed that God would keep his promise. And so a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead, a nation with so many people that like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, there is no way to count them. You're probably familiar with this story. Sarah was 90 years old. And it was a couple of years before that when God spoke to Abraham and said, you are going to have a son with your wife Sarah, not with anyone else, with your wife Sarah. And after some time went by, Sarah didn't believe it anymore, and she said, "Go have sex with Hagar so that you can have a son and you can have this legacy." And so that's what he does. Again, one of his mistakes. But Abraham is almost 100 years old. I think I got that right. Abraham was 100 years old. Sarah was 90 years old when Isaac was born. And it was by faith. See, that they had the misstep, but they still had faith because it was given by God. It wasn't their faith. It was given by God. and Isaac is born. And so by faith, we see the impossible. I don't know about you. I have never seen a 90-year-old woman with a newborn child of her own. Have you? I mean, I'd love to hear about it. Maybe not, though. That'd be weird. But a 90-year-old woman and a 100-year-old man, first of all, didn't know they still did that when they're that old, but whatever, more power to you. Secondly, that they were able to even have a child. And it goes on to say that after Sarah died, Abraham lived a while longer, and he got another wife, and he had even more kids past 100 years old. Now, we think rock stars are weird, and actors are weird when they're like 67 years old, and they marry somebody who's 30 and then has a child. This is not that case. This is an impossible thing that happened, that was allowed by God to a man who was faithful. By faith, we see the impossible. Or do we? See, I touched on this just a little bit, that we've always done something wrong. People are always going to let us down. And so now we have this entire cancel culture that if you do one slip up, even if it's 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you're canceled. And we write people off immediately. But by faith, we see the impossible. Do you know there's people that I know that I have written off because I don't believe that they're actually ever going to come to faith. I don't believe that they're ever going to come to Jesus Christ. I've written them off. Where's my faith in that? By faith, we see the impossible. We see it time and time again in Bible story after Bible story, that by faith we see the impossible happen. We see seas parted. We see children who shouldn't be born being born. We see a holy God come down to earth and to be born of a virgin to save every single human soul that calls on his name. By faith, we see the impossible. By faith, we see people who are so far from God come to God. We see the impossible. And with this cancel culture, the danger in the cancel culture is cancel culture cancels our ability to see the impossible. We write everything off immediately. We look at pastors who have done something wrong in the past, and unfortunately, there's a few of them. You want to know why? Again, pastors are not perfect people. I haven't met a single perfect pastor. I've met a lot of really, really jacked up, messed up pastors. I'm one of them. And any pastor you meet, whether it's on restoration staff or another staff around town or wherever you call your church home, guess what? It's full of jacked up, messed up people that were given the title pastor, that were gifted by God to lead a church. It doesn't mean that they're perfect. And we see these people make mistake after mistake, some of them larger than others, and we write them off. We throw them off the ship because there's no room for imperfect pastors on here. There's no room for imperfect board members on here. There's no room for imperfect Christians on this boat. We write them off. And we cancel the impossible because we don't really believe that God can do that. It's killing our faith. Cancel culture is killing our faith. Because the moment we don't believe somebody is redeemable is the moment we believe that we're better than them. Right? And isn't that what cancel culture is all about? We feel bad about ourselves. We feel bad about the state that our country is in. And so instead of pointing the finger back at me, I'm going to point it out at other people so I can make myself feel better. See, you can cancel me because I can't say words right. I don't know if you ever look up to see what's trending on Twitter, but 9 times out of 10, if you look through the list, cancel something, something, something is there. Cancel this person, cancel that person. It's ruining our faith because we believe that we're better, that we don't have anything in our past that's going to cancel us. Boy, would we be wrong. And aren't we wrong? That's why it comes back to grace and love, friends. Grace and love allows us to see the impossible. By faith, we show grace and love, and we see the impossible. All right, let's keep going. All these people died, the people who were with Abraham, all of Abraham's descendants and his children, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Abraham, and the descendants. We've talked about Jacob's descendants, right? 12 tribes of Israel, ringing any bells? Joseph. All these people died still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. Obviously, people who say such things are looking forward to a country they can call their own. If they had longed for the country they came from, they could have gone back. But they were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. That is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. They were looking to a future. Not that they were going to be able to get this whole thing done. Not that they were going to be the ones to see this whole thing come to fruition, but they saw a future. Did you catch that in one of the verses? I believe it was in, let me find it here, 13. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. No matter where they went, they were foreigners and nomads. Abraham never really settled down. He lived in tents. They didn't have a giant community in which they lived in. It was shocking to read through the Genesis story and see that everywhere he went, they just put up tents. They were living on other people's land. They never had their own land. Why was that? Because they knew that this was eventually going to be the land that God gave to them, but their hope was much bigger than that. They didn't focus just on what they needed to accomplish and how they needed to do it. They were willing to leave a legacy for the people to come after them. Not that they were going to be able to see it, but by faith, we leave a legacy. By faith, we leave a legacy. We take these steps, we take these moments, these movements in front of us, and we push forward. Not for our own sake and for our own gain, but by faith, so we can leave a legacy. My biggest prayer right now is that with Restoration Church, that the day that I leave Restoration Church, which I don't know when that's going to be, I mean, we're just starting, but I'm not in charge of my time. God's in charge of my time. God may call me somewhere else. I got to tell you, the East Coast, I love the East Coast, and one of these days, I'm going to go there. I'm just giving you a warning shot, across the bow, whatever. Someday, I'm going to live on the East Coast. Anyway, but my biggest prayer for Restoration Church is it doesn't end with me. That the legacy of Restoration Church is somehow bigger than me. That this ministry that we're starting is bigger than me, it's bigger than you, it's bigger than any of us collectively. It's greater than the sum of its parts. You know that term, greater than the sum of our parts, that all of these things add up, but when we add it all up, it's greater than what it should be. That's what I want Restoration Church to be. And that's what I want my life to be. I don't want this to be a life that, well, Brian did that, Brian did that, Brian did that, Brian did that. No, I want it to be through Brian, God did this. Through Brian, God did that. Through Brian, God planted this. By faith, we leave a legacy. We're not going to have a legacy if we're not taking risks. If we refuse to see the impossible, our legacy is going to be boring. Can I say that? If we're calling ourselves and we're living by faith and we say that we're going to risk, okay? And there's no risk taken. We don't see the impossible. There's no way that we're going to leave a legacy. I'm sorry. The legacy is going to be that person lived a very safe life. That person worked, where did that person work? Didn't he work for a church? I think he worked for a church. Sure, your friends and family will mourn you when you're gone. What's the legacy going to be? I have to bring it back to Hamilton real quick if I can. Is that okay? Sorry, I'm doing it anyway. My wife is like rolling her eyes right now. She's not here, but I'm seeing you through the phone right now, and you're rolling your eyes. There's a quote, a song lyric in Hamilton near the end, where Alexander Hamilton's character the character of Alexander Hamilton is questioning his legacy. What is legacy? He says this: legacy. What is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. I wrote some notes at the beginning of a song someone will sing for me. A legacy is planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. Isn't that faith? By faith, we leave a legacy. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. If you're not familiar with that portion of the story, what happened was Abraham and Sarah had Isaac, this wonderful, I assume, wonderful child. And when he was a young boy, God told Abraham to go and sacrifice his only son. Sound familiar? And so they packed up their belongings, and Abraham and Isaac went up on this mountain. And they're gathering everything around, and Isaac asks his dad, Dad, I'm familiar with the customs in which we build altars and we offer a sacrifice, but Dad, we're kind of missing the most important part here, the sacrifice. And Abraham says, don't worry, son, God will provide a sacrifice. Abraham had faith that God was going to provide a sacrifice, that he was not going to have to sacrifice his son, but even if he did have to, that God somehow was going to bring Isaac back from the dead. So in a way, and as the story goes, Abraham lays Isaac on the altar, brings the knife up, and it's at that moment that God says, stop. Look over there, there's a ram and its horns are stuck in some bushes. Go take that ram and sacrifice it. I know now that you won't even keep your son from me. So by faith, the faith that God had given him. Do I know that God gave him that faith? Yes, because why else would God ask him to do that? If the faith wasn't given by God and Abraham just was able to manifest faith himself, then why would God tell him to go sacrifice his son? God gave Abraham the faith, so he knew how much faith Abraham had. He knew how much faith Abraham had. And so it's Abraham in his mind was ready to sacrifice his son. By faith, knowing that God could resurrect him back. How is your faith? Are you asking for faith? Are you asking for more faith? Because it's by faith that we are resurrected. By faith, we are resurrected. Just like we see the faith that Abraham had in his son, that his son was going to be resurrected one way or the other, whether God provided a different sacrifice or he had to sacrifice his one son. God knew that that was going to happen. He knew everything that was going to happen. And God also knew, because God is outside of time. Remember, we talked about this last week. God is outside of time. So at the moment that he's asking Abraham to sacrifice his only son, God is literally in the same moment sacrificing his only son. And it's through that sacrifice and that sacrifice alone that we are resurrected. You want to know what's kind of funny is, was Abraham, was he considered righteous before circumcision? Yeah. In Romans chapter 4, it talks about that. He was considered righteous before his circumcision because it was by faith that Abraham was considered righteous. I think God just wanted to mess with the dudes. I don't know. I don't know if that's true, okay? I do know that he was considered righteous, but I don't know why I went there. But I felt like it was getting heavy. So I decided to do that. But by faith, we are resurrected through Jesus Christ. Through this sacrifice of God's only Son, Jesus Christ, we are resurrected. We are dead in sin. And by faith in Christ Jesus, we are resurrected. And God has given all of us, I believe God has given every single human being on the face of this earth the faith required to accept Jesus Christ as Savior. Now, don't hear that the wrong way. I didn't say that every single person has the faith of Jesus Christ. I said every person, God has given the capacity of faith to accept Jesus Christ as Savior. The only difference is some of us have accepted it and some of us have not accepted that gift of salvation, that gift of faith. So how do we connect this to our hearts? How do we make this stick? I got some questions for us to ask in the few minutes we have left. If we're going to live by faith, if we're going to be a people who live by faith, if Restoration Church, if we're going to be living by faith and not by anything else, then we have some questions. If I'm living by faith, what do I need to risk? What do I need to risk? Do I need to risk my job? Do I need to risk some sort of security? Do I need to risk a friendship in order to say something to somebody? Do I need to talk about something that with a friend who is not going to like what I have to say? What do I need to risk? By faith. Not on my own to make some grand gesture, but again, remember, like I said in the beginning of this, it's all based on the measure of faith that God has given to us. That's how we measure ourselves. That's how we look to see how we're doing as human beings and Christians. As we look at the measure of faith that God has given to us, and am I living up to that? What do I need to risk? Some of you need to risk leaving. Something. By faith, what do I need to risk? The next question, what don't I believe will happen? We look at the story of Sarah and how she believed eventually that she was going to have a son. It took a while. You can read all about it. But what don't I believe will happen? What are the things that my faith is handicapped by? I'm handicapping because I don't have the faith required yet. If so, how do I ask for more faith? Can I ask for God for more faith? And the answer is yes. Ask for more faith. What don't I believe will happen? Remember that story in the Bible where Jesus is going to heal the young boy's son or the young man's son, young boy's son. I don't know. It's the Bible. Could have happened, but the young man's son, and the man is pleading with Jesus to heal his son. And Jesus asks if he believes, and he says, "Yes, but help my unbelief." What do you need to ask God to help with your unbelief? What do you believe? What do I believe is not going to happen? I know for me, I oftentimes don't believe that I'm capable of doing any of this kind of stuff. And I need to continually ask that question. And I question myself time and time again. Number 3, what legacy am I leaving? What legacy am I leaving? Are we rising above the issues at hand? Are we rising above the COVID issues, the face mask issues? Are we rising above racial issues and cultural issues and cancel issues? Are we rising above all of that to leave a legacy greater than those things? Or are we getting ourselves down into the weeds in those things? What legacy am I leaving? Someone who touted off on social media about how wrong everything is and how terrible people are and how much I hate everything and everyone around me? Or am I leaving a legacy of Jesus Christ? Everywhere I go, people see Jesus Christ. What legacy am I leaving? Are people seeing Brian Williams or are they seeing Jesus Christ? Lastly, what needs resurrecting? I believe nothing is beyond resurrecting. I believe there's not a single person that's beyond resurrecting. I don't believe there's a single person on this earth that is beyond resurrecting. Like I said, I believe God has given everyone the amount of faith necessary to come to Christ. What about things like your marriage? Does your marriage need resurrecting? By faith, can your marriage be resurrected? By faith, can that friendship be resurrected? By faith, can you quit that addiction? By faith, can life be resurrected inside of you so that you live for something greater? By faith, what needs resurrecting? And stick with it, friends. Stick with it. Stick with this whole thing, because here's the last thing. I talked about in the beginning of faith breeds perseverance. Well, you can also say perseverance breeds faith. Some of us quit. I've quit before I got to see the end of it. Perseverance breeds faith. Perseverance in the scripture. Perseverance in continue reading this. Continue praying. Continue gathering together in limited capacities and all the rules. Continue. Persevere. To rise above it. Persevere to risk it. Persevere to see the impossible. Persevere to leave a legacy. And persevere to resurrect the things in your life that need resurrecting. And I'm going to stop right there. Perseverance breeds faith. Faith breeds perseverance. What am I risking? What do I need to risk? What don't I believe will happen? What legacy am I leaving? And what needs resurrecting? Father, I pray that we see you. I pray that we see the faith that you've given to us, and that we would live by faith. God, not on our own flesh and in the things that we're capable of doing, but God, the things that you are capable of doing in us. Thank you for your love and for your mercy, and for your grace. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much for joining, and we will see you guys Sunday night, 6 o'clock p.m. Check out our Facebook page to get the address, and we will see you guys there.